Think about the most famous emperors in history. Names like Augustus, Charlemagne, or Suleiman the Magnificent probably jump straight to the front of your mind. We see them in statues, on gold coins, and leading massive armies across windswept plains. But if you look closely at the shadows behind those golden thrones, you'll see something else. You'll see a hand moving the chess pieces, a voice whispering the strategies that change the world, and a mind far more calculated than the man wearing the crown. History has a habit of focusing on the person holding the sword, but the real power often belonged to the women who mastered the art of influence, intelligence, and survival. These weren't just wives or daughters. They were the secret architects of every major empire. They ran the bureaucracies, managed the treasuries, and outmaneuvered the greatest generals of their time without ever having to draw a blade. Today, we are stepping behind the velvet curtains to meet the most powerful women who secretly controlled the ancient and medieval worlds, pulling the strings of destiny from the shadows of the palace. We have to start in the glittering, dangerous heart of ancient Egypt. Everyone knows Cleopatra, but long before her, there was a woman who didn't just influence the pharaoh. She became the pharaoh, and then she vanished from the records for 1,000 years. Her name was Hatshepsut. She was born into a world where only men were supposed to hold the divine office of the king. When her husband passed away, leaving a young heir who wasn't her son, she was supposed to just step aside as a regent. Instead, Hatshepsut did something revolutionary. She realized that power isn't just about being in charge. It's about branding. She began appearing in statues wearing the traditional royal beard and the double crown. She didn't just lead. She built the most ambitious trade networks Egypt had ever seen, sending expeditions to the mysterious land of Punt and returning with gold, ebony, and exotic trees. She turned Egypt from a military machine into an economic superpower. But because she was a woman who had stolen the spotlight, later rulers tried to chip her name off the monuments. They wanted to make her a forbidden memory. Yet, the sheer scale of the prosperity she created was so massive that history couldn't keep her hidden forever. She proved that a woman could run the most powerful empire on earth better than any man, even if she had to wear a mask to do it. Now, let's travel across the Mediterranean to the marble halls of the Roman Empire. Rome was a society built on the idea of the tough, stoic male soldier. But if you look at the reign of the very first emperor, Augustus, you find Livia Drusilla. Livia was the ultimate political operator. While Augustus was busy pretending that Rome was still a republic, Livia was busy ensuring that their family would rule for centuries. She was his most trusted advisor, his sounding board, and some say, his conscience. She managed the vast domestic networks of the Roman elite, knowing exactly who owed what to whom. When Augustus was away at the frontiers, it was Livia who kept the Senate in check. She understood that in Rome, the real power wasn't in the forum, it was in the dining rooms and the private gardens where deals were made. She was so effective that she lived to see her son, her grandson, and her great-grandson take the throne. She was the one who defined what a Roman empress should be, setting a precedent for every woman who followed. She showed that you didn't need a seat in the Senate to dictate the laws of the world. Moving forward in time and eastward to the Byzantine Empire, we find a story that sounds like it came straight out of a movie. Picture a woman named Theodora. She wasn't born into royalty. In fact, she grew up as an actress and a performer in the Hippodrome of Constantinople, which was about as low as you could get on the social ladder. But she was brilliant, charismatic, and incredibly sharp. She caught the eye of the future Emperor Justinian, and he was so captivated by her mind that he changed the law so he could marry her. When the Nika riots broke out and the city was burning, Justinian was ready to pack his bags and run. He was terrified. It was Theodora who stood her ground in the palace. She famously told him that purple makes a fine burial shroud, basically telling him that it was better to fall as an emperor than to live as a coward in exile. Her courage saved the throne. From that moment on, they ruled as true equals. Theodora was the one who pushed for laws protecting women's rights, property ownership, and safety. She ran a secret intelligence network that kept her informed of every plot in the empire. Justinian may have been the face of the Byzantine Golden Age, but Theodora was its spine. If we go even further east to the vast plains of the Mongol Empire, we find a group of women who handled the most complex logistics in human history. We often think of the Mongols as just a pack of riders on horses, but Genghis Khan knew that his daughters were his greatest asset. He practiced what historians now call Silk Road diplomacy. He would marry his daughters to the kings of allied nations, send those kings off to fight in his wars, and leave his daughters in charge of the kingdoms. While the men were off conquering, the women were running the Silk Road. They managed the trade, the laws, and the taxes. After Genghis passed away, his daughters and granddaughters, like the legendary Kutulun, became the kingmakers. Kutulun was a warrior who famously said she would only marry a man who could beat her in a wrestling match. She never lost. But beyond her physical strength, she was a master of the treasury. She understood the value of the spoils of war and how to distribute them to keep the tribes loyal. The Mongol Empire didn't survive because of just one man. It survived because a network of highly educated, fiercely independent women kept the machinery of the state running while the armies were thousands of miles away. In ancient China, the Tang dynasty produced a woman so powerful that she literally started her own dynasty. Wu Zetian began her life at court as a low-level consort, but she was a genius at navigating the treacherous waters of the Forbidden City. She realized that information was worth more than gold. She created an elaborate system of secret police and informants, allowing her to neutralize any rivals before they even knew she was a threat. Eventually, she declared herself emperor, not empress consort, but the actual emperor. She was the only woman in 3,000 years of Chinese history to do so. Under her rule, the empire expanded its borders. The civil service exams were reformed to allow people of merit, rather than just noble birth, to rise, and the economy boomed. She was a champion of the people, even if she was ruthless to the nobility. The traditional historians, who were mostly men, painted her as a monster for centuries, accusing her of every crime imaginable. But when you look at the records of the common people, her reign was a time of peace and prosperity. She proved that a woman could hold the mandate of heaven just as firmly as any man. As we move into the Islamic Golden Age, we find Shajar al-Durr in Egypt. Her story is one of incredible timing and iron will. She was a former slave who became the wife of the Sultan. When the Sultan passed away during the middle of a massive crusade from Europe, Shajar al-Durr realized that if the news got out, the army would lose heart and the empire would fall. So, she kept the Sultan's passing a secret for months. She managed the government, issued orders in his name, and coordinated the defense of Egypt. When the secret finally came out, the people were so impressed by her leadership that they declared her the Sultana. She was the one who negotiated the ransom of the French King Louis IX, turning a military crisis into a diplomatic and financial victory. Though her reign as a formal ruler was short because of the political pressures of the time, she was the bridge between two major dynasties and the woman who saved Egypt from a foreign takeover. In the heart of Europe during the Middle Ages, Eleanor of Aquitaine was a force of nature. She was the Queen of France and then the Queen of England, but she was always the Duchess of her own massive lands first. Eleanor wasn't content to sit in a castle and sew. She went on the Second Crusade, riding across the world to the Holy Land. She was a patron of the arts, creating the courts of love that defined the culture of chivalry, but her real power was political. She was the mother of two kings, Richard the Lionheart and John, and she was the one who held England together while Richard was away fighting or in a prison in Europe. She traveled across the continent at the age of 80 to secure alliances and ensure the survival of her family's empire. She was a woman who understood that land was power, and she spent her entire life making sure that her family held the biggest share of it. She was the grandmother of almost every royal house in Europe, truly the secret queen of the continent. We should also talk about Catherine the Great of Russia. Though she was a German princess who moved to a foreign land, she understood the Russian spirit better than the men born to it. After she took power from her ineffective husband, she didn't just rule. She transformed Russia into a modern European power. She was a woman of the Enlightenment, corresponding with the greatest philosophers of her time like Voltaire. She expanded the Russian borders to the Black Sea, restructured the entire legal code, and founded the first institute for the higher education of women in the country. She was a master of the long game, understanding that for Russia to be an empire, it needed more than just a big army. It needed a cultural and intellectual foundation. She was the one who pulled Russia out of the shadows of the past and onto the world stage, and she did it with a combination of charm, intellect, and an uncompromising will. Deep in the history of the Maya civilization, we find Lady Six Sky. She was a princess from the great city of Dos Pilas who was sent to the city of Naranjo to restart their royal line. Usually in Maya culture, women were the weavers of alliances, but Lady Six Sky became the weaver of wars. She arrived at a city that had been humiliated in conflict and turned it back into a superpower. Monuments show her standing over captives, a traditional image reserved for the most powerful warrior kings. She didn't just give birth to the next king, she led the armies, planned the city's expansion, and ruled as a dominant figure for decades. She was the secret to the city's survival, proving that in the jungles of Central America, a woman's strategic brilliance was just as valued as a man's strength on the battlefield. Why have these stories been hidden for so long? For a lot of history, the people writing the books had a specific agenda. They wanted to present a world where power was a masculine trait, where kings ruled alone, and where women were only background characters. But history is messy, and power is a fluid thing. In every palace, there were whispers. In every treasury, there were records of women managing the wealth. In every war room, there were advisors who had the ear of the general. These women didn't always need to wear the crown to own the empire. They understood that real power is often found in the quiet moments, in the letters written late at night, and in the education of the next generation. Take Anna Komnena, the daughter of the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I. She was one of the first great female historians. While her father was out fighting the Turks and dealing with the first wave of the Crusades, Anna was in the palace, watching, learning, and recording everything. She wrote the Alexiad, a detailed history of her father's reign. But through her writing, she wasn't just recording history. She was shaping how the world would view the Byzantine Empire for 1,000 years. She was a scientist, a physician, and a scholar who ran the largest hospital in Constantinople. She was the intellectual heartbeat of the empire, a woman who understood that the pen was quite literally as powerful as the sword. In the Ottoman Empire, there was a period known as the Sultanate of Women. For over a century, the Valide sultans, or the mothers of the sultans, were the most powerful people in the world. Women like Hurrem Sultan and Kosem Sultan didn't just live in the harem, they ran the empire. They corresponded with foreign kings, managed the massive imperial bureaucracy, and were the only ones the sultan could truly trust. Kosem Sultan, in particular, acted as regent for her sons and even her grandson. She was the one who made the appointments, decided on the budgets, and handled the diplomatic crises. The Ottoman Empire was at the peak of its power during this time, and it was a woman's hand that kept the ship of state on course through some very stormy waters. Even in the Viking Age, where we imagine a world of bearded raiders, women held the keys to the kingdom, literally. The keys to the storage chests and the longhouses were kept at a woman's belt, symbolizing her total control over the wealth and food of the community. A woman like Queen Tyra of Denmark is remembered as the pride warrior of Denmark. She was the one credited with building the Denverke, a massive system of fortifications that protected her people from southern invasions for centuries. While the men were off raiding, she was building a nation. She was the secret architect of the Danish border, a woman who saw the need for defense and made it a reality. The power of these women often came from their ability to see the big picture. They weren't just thinking about the next battle. They were thinking about the next 50 years. They were thinking about succession, about trade routes, and about the stability of the people. This long-term thinking is what allowed empires to survive beyond the life of a single charismatic male leader. It was the women who provided the continuity, the memory, and the administrative skill that turned a collection of conquered lands into a lasting civilization. Look at Empress Maria Theresa of the Holy Roman Empire. She took over a fractured, bankrupted empire that everyone thought would be torn apart by her rivals. She was a 23-year-old mother when she took the throne. Her enemies laughed at her, but she was a master of reform. She modernized the army, introduced mandatory education, and overhauled the tax system. She didn't just survive. She became one of the most successful rulers in European history. She had 16 children, many of whom became kings and queens themselves, ensuring that her family's influence would dominate the continent for another century. She was the ultimate power mom, balancing the demands of a massive empire with the complexities of European royalty. The stories of these women teach us that power isn't a one-dimensional thing. It's not just about who has the loudest voice or the biggest army. It's about who has the most influence. It's about who understands the system and knows how to make it work for them. These women were survivors. They lived in worlds that were often hostile to their ambitions, but they found the cracks in the walls and built their own paths through them. They used their intelligence, their charm, and their strategic minds to shape the world we live in today. In the Italian Renaissance, Catherine de' Medici was the secret queen of France. She was an outsider, an Italian in a French court that didn't trust her, but she was a master of the soft power of the era. She introduced new fashions, new cuisines, and new courtly manners, But she was also a woman who lived through some of the most violent religious wars in history. She spent her life trying to find a middle ground to keep the country from tearing itself apart. She was the one who managed the shifting alliances and the egos of the noble houses, often being the only person in the room with a clear head. Though her legacy is complicated, there is no doubt that she was the one holding the fabric of France together during its most divided hour. There is also the story of Mumtaz Mahal in the Mughal Empire. While she is most famous for being the woman for whom the Taj Mahal was built, she was far more than a muse. She was the Sultan's chief advisor. She traveled with him on his military campaigns, providing counsel on everything from politics to the treatment of prisoners. She held the imperial seal, meaning no official document could be signed without her approval. She was the heart of the administration, a woman who brought a sense of compassion and wisdom to the harsh realities of imperial rule. Her influence was so great that when she passed away, the emperor was so devastated that he spent the rest of his life building a monument that would match her greatness. The real monument was the empire she helped him lead. These secret controllers of empires prove that history is a shared story. It's not a solo act. For every great emperor, there was a woman who was his partner in power, his rival in strategy, or his teacher in leadership. These women didn't always get their names on the statues or their faces on the coins, but they are there, etched into the foundations of every civilization. They are the ones who turned chaos into order, trade into wealth, and conquest into a lasting legacy. As we look back at these empires, from the sands of Egypt to the gardens of the Mughals, we see that the most powerful thing in the world isn't a crown, it's an idea. And many of the best ideas for how to run the world came from the women we've talked about today. They were the ones who saw the potential for a better way to lead. They were the ones who understood that an empire is only as strong as its secrets, its trade, and its people. They were the masters of the invisible empire, the one that exists behind the symbols of power. When you think about history now, I hope you see it a little differently. I hope you see the threads that these women wove through the centuries. I hope you recognize that the great man theory of history is only half of the truth. The other half is found in the lives of the women who knew how to pull the strings. They were the ones who ensured that the libraries stayed open, that the grain silos stayed full, and that the laws were upheld. They were the secret keepers and the kingmakers. History is a vast landscape, and the more we explore it, the more we find that the shadows are actually full of life. These women weren't just waiting to be noticed, they were busy changing the world. And by remembering them, we aren't just giving them their due, we are getting a clearer picture of how humanity actually works. We are seeing the full spectrum of our ambition and our capability. These women are a reminder that no matter how much the world tries to hide a story, the truth of power will always find a way to the surface. So the next time you see a portrait of a king or a list of emperors, take a second to look beyond the frame. Think about the woman who was standing just out of sight, the one who had already predicted the next move, the one who had already solved the problem, and the one who was truly in control. Their influence is everywhere, if you know where to look. They were the silent architects of the past, and their work still stands all around us today. Thanks for being here to uncover these hidden lives. There are so many more stories out there, and every one of them is a piece of the puzzle of who we are. Keep looking for the secret hands that moved the world, because sometimes the most important parts of history are the ones that were whispered in the dark.